What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hudak, and we are back with the regularly scheduled programming on Fridays with a guest episode. I have been doing some solo episodes over the last couple of weeks, just with all of the changes and everything going on over at Tulane. I just kind of wanted to dive into those things myself and be able to give those discussion points the space that they deserve and not throw those kind of things on a guest. So all of that to say, happy to kind of get back into the schedule here. So Tulane has a Military Bowl coming up against Virginia Tech on December 27th, this next Wednesday. My gosh, life really comes at you fast, and I will be having a preview episode drop likely from DC, as I'll be down there with the team this week getting ready for that. But without looking past this bowl game, I do think it's just as important to talk about what's going on with the head of Tulane football now and head coach Jon Sumrall, and get some insight on that from someone that has spent time covering Troy football program, Jon Sumrall, and see how he's coached and moved and how those traits have kind of evolved over 2 seasons. And I had him on earlier this year. I do have some repeat guests, and he was my guest to preview the South Alabama opener for Tulane, where that was my closest score prediction that I got close to all season long. Dave Schultz, he's the host of Locked On Sunbelt podcast, and again, has spent a lot of time down in Alabama and around Jon Sumrall and Troy football. And I really enjoyed this conversation, learned a lot about, I think, what you could see in the moves that he made on the Troy team, how he treats his players, and how that really translates over to on the field production, and got a really good sense of him and a bright future for Tulane after this really good conversation. Awesome. So I appreciate you coming back on, even though where are you on the East Coast right now? I guess I should ask.
I'm in Stuart, Florida. Childhood friend invited me to come down, and he's like, well, Syracuse is playing. Let me go. Unfortunately, I have some time on my hands, so why don't we do this? So,
how about it? Well, then I will get right to it. Being that you cover the Sunbelt, obviously, I think that the reaction to Jon Sumrall coming over to Tulane has been probably one of the more consensus positive reactions and welcomings that I can remember in recent times. And I mean, that's all just really in 2 or 3 weeks without any actual football going on at all. So someone that has been able to really see Jon Sumrall kind of up close over at Troy, what was his influence over there, and how does that kind of translate over to Tulane and what he can do over with this program?
Well, this kind of goes back to Phil Steele. So Jon Sumrall had gotten the job, and Phil Steele in his preview magazine says, hey, watch out for Troy, because though the record wasn't as good, they do have some talent. And wouldn't you know, Jon Sumrall was able to figure out that talent. He absolutely won in back-to-back season Sunbelt champions 2 consecutive years differently. In his first year, he had issues at quarterback. He brought in a transfer, Jarrett Dagey from West Virginia, and he was inconsistent at best. And then Gunnar Watson would play, and he was inconsistent, would keep on throwing interceptions. But they had a defense led by Carlton Marshall, who may have had an extra year or 2, but he left the college football ranks as the all-time leading tackler. He had Kamani Vidal, who could run the football. So specifically against South Alabama in Mobile, a lot of times they weren't necessarily trying to score, although I guess that's maybe the ultimate goal. He was like, we just need a couple of first downs to flip the field because they can't move the ball against us. We got it at the 20. We just need to be able to kick it like at the 45 or something like that. And they were very, very effective. This year, it was different because Gunnar Watson, took it to the next level. He went like 2 months without throwing an interception. And they had took a couple of games for them to figure out the defense without not only Carlton Marshall, but a couple other guys. And then they sort of rolled, right? I mean, the JMU loss was their last loss. That was a 16-14 ball game. They haven't lost since. I would contend they're probably were playing better than JMU at the end of the year. So Jon Sumrall can win with whatever talent he has. He'll have his system, and I'm not sure he was there long enough to institute his system in Detroit for 2 years. So he'll find out what Tulane is best at, and we'll work at that while maybe trying to look forward and institute a system if he's there 3 or 4 years.
We've heard him really say that he adapts every single year, that he's run different defense just based on the personnel and the guys that he has. So that, to me, checks out with that very well. I'm curious, though. So Gunnar Watson was one of the 2 quarterbacks from the year prior. And so he ended up sticking with him. And could you see kind of like a growth and development out of the role at quarterback? And then in that same regard, how did he kind of help out that quarterback by designing the offense?
Well, I mean, nobody, first of all, Gunnar Watson is a 6-year college football player that did not transfer. There's very few of those around. And he talks about Gunnar Watson all the time. This guy was a starter. He was benched. He was a part-time guy. He came off the bench. And so one of those, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. And I would be I'm not going to lie and tell you, I saw what was coming. That happened. No way, no chance that you could have the kind of year that he had in 2022 and that he would go, October, November without throwing an interception. His one interception over 2 months was a Hail Mary at the end of the half. So I don't know if that really counts. Yeah. So Jon Sumrall was leaning into that the kind of leadership that Gunnar has. And I don't know if it was his first year or second year, but he goes, one day we're in fall ball and the offense just didn't play well. The offense had been playing well all practice, and this practice it did not. And Gunnar Watson was the one who got into everybody's faces. It wasn't the coaches; it was the quarterback. And I think that's where Jon says that he saw the growth in Gunnar Watson, and that he knew they were in good hands moving forward this year.
Yeah, a lot of the time to me, it really comes down to confidence and instilling that in your quarterback, especially. And I think that's really good news for Tulane fans, especially considering that we don't really know what's going on with the transfer portal situation, whether or not we're going to retain Guy Horton or if he's going to bring another guy in. But it kind of seems like regardless of who the quarterback ends up being, what a strong trait that at least I'm kind of seeing in Jon Sumrall is his ability to just kind of make things work. And so whichever quarterback ends up coming into Tulane, assessing what their strength pieces are and then assembling an offense based on that, it's a comforting feeling to say the least.
Well, I think one of the things that probably settled Gunnar down is when you're flip-flopping quarterbacks, you always feel like if you make a mistake, you're coming out. Right. Well, this year he probably made a couple of mistakes early on, and Sumrall probably told him, you're not coming out. So, let's avoid the mistakes, but don't worry about if you make one, the next guy's coming in. You're the guy. All right. So we're sticking with you. And I think they end up with like a 10-game winning streak. So I think that paid off in the end, obviously.
Obviously, yes. I mean, to be a first-time head coach and go 23-4 over those 2 seasons really just can't be ignored to me. But, kind of in just thinking
2 of those losses are against the Power 5, right?
Very good point.
Kansas State and Ole Miss are 2 of those 4 losses. One is a Hail Mary to App State. And then the other one was to JMU by 2. So he's got 4 losses, but I mean, those are pretty explainable losses.
We'll get a rematch at Kansas State this year. That's at least for sure. But, I think that the reaction to Jon Sumrall leaving Troy really just showed the kind of coach that he is. I mean, Tulane fans have gone through a lot of emotions, the good, the bad, and the ugly the last couple of weeks with head coaching changes and what's kind of gone on thereafter. But what has really just been impressive to me is, that was his first head coaching job. So this is his first time leaving that for another one. He doesn't have a blueprint for doing this type of thing. And, to come in and say that he was really committed to doing things the right way here. And even if that doesn't help him in the short term, he's more interested in long-term success. That to me is very, it's a quiet confidence, but I think says a lot about Jon Sumrall and just the way that we've seen him move in such a short time here at Tulane. That's what I said before about despite not that much on-field stuff going on, you could see really how his decision-making is at the top.
Yeah. So this stuff happens fast, right? In these days. And it's good that he can adapt on a year-by-year basis because I'm not sure how much of a program you can build in college football with the transfer portal these days. You need to figure out not only is spring ball these days going to be used for the players, but it's going to be used for the coaches because we may need to adapt, within spring ball and then maybe even do something different in fall ball. But so things happen fast. I was actually in Louisville, Kentucky when Mark Stoops was rumored to be going to take the A&M job. And I was in, it was Kentucky and Louisville. So going into the game, Mark Stoops was getting the job. Coming out of the game, he was definitely getting the job. And so it's being reported he's getting the job. I type up, well, if Stoops is getting the job at A&M, Jon Sumrall is going to hop over to Kentucky. And by the time I woke up, none of that was happening. So this stuff happens fast. And so, and then all of a sudden, little droplets, Tulane's doing this, Tulane's doing that. And all of a sudden, Jon Sumrall, seems to be the guy. And in terms of leadership, I appreciate what he brings to the table. Some of it is coach speak.
Sure.
It's kind of like a fighter, no one's going to outwork me. And that may be the case sometimes, but he's like, no one's going to be tougher than us. Well, isn't the same coach saying that everywhere? Right? Everybody says that. So it's a nice thought, but everybody kind of says that. No one's going to outwork us. I did like what he said. It was interesting. We're going to, basically he was saying is that, if the other guys are chirping, we're not going to chirp back, right? We're going to try and win and move on. If somehow we don't want that 15-yard flag, right? But then, in the Sunbelt championship ball game, App State pulled his quarterback by the face mask and it was not called. And it was quite the show on the sideline from Jon Sumrall. And he made a star of his get back coach, who had a little bit of a difficult time getting him back, but eventually he did. And then I guess the next day was the get back coach's birthday and everything like that. So he has a little fire in him if he sees something wrong. We'll just say that.
I think, again, I've seen a lot of coaches in my day that have been the most mild-mannered guys, and then a bad call happens, and it's just, you kind of just see red for your guys. So I think, again, the guys can appreciate that. He did say something in his introductory press. Maybe he was talking with us afterwards about probably needing to apologize to some Sunbelt refs over the last couple of years. So that's probably what he was referring to. But seen Willie Fritz do very similar things when things have not gotten called on the sideline. So I think really what it comes down to here is, at least it's not really an apples to apples comparison with Willie Fritz going over to Houston, because the idea there is that it's a Power 5 program. So this is an interesting case where it's G5 to G5. And I liked what Jon Sumrall said when he was talking to the media after his introductory press conference, where he either said the P5, G5 is somewhat of a sham or a scam. I can't remember which word it is, but it's the idea that there are some Power 5 programs that are probably operating a lot worse than several G5 programs, but you just kind of get stuck under that moniker. And then within both of those tiers, there is a huge difference between the top and the bottom of that. And so I think the idea is that even though you might look at this, I guess, as a lateral move for some people, I think what's interesting now is the college football playoff expansion. Honestly, couldn't have happened at a better time for Tulane, in the sense of now you can really say that to a coach and have that coach believe that this is a place that they can do that. So compared to, the other G5 schools that you see around with Jon Sumrall at the helm, how do you see Tulane kind of making a run at the playoffs next season?
Well, that was exactly an episode of Lockdown Sunbelt. Is the Tulane job a lateral move for Jon Sumrall? So financially, it is not a lateral move, right? He moved up, whether he's getting, 2.1, 2.5, someone said 4, and their budget is about $50 million. Troy is about $33 million. But it is two very different colleges. One is a small rural, I'm not sure anything else is in Troy. I think someone said Lockheed Martin is a factory outside of Troy. And then, New Orleans is not a college town, right? That's a professional town. You got the Saints, you got the Pelicans, when they decide not to blow a 19-point halftime lead to John Morant and the Grizzlies. And of course, up the road about 70 miles is LSU. So Tulane's got a nice pocket. And, looking back at some of the games that they had, they drew really well this year, right? They were selling out 30,000 a game. Well, that sounds easy. Well, it's not. All right. And so it is a lateral move financially, or it's not a lateral move financially. However, I do think that, he could have been in a playoff with Troy. All right. Those two things I think are the same. You got to go undefeated, and you kind of have to beat that Power 5 team to get ranked. And then you can move on. You can move on up, but you could not find maybe two diametrically opposed programs in terms of not the culture, but just the situation. One is in a major league city, and one is in a really small college town. Troy, that may be smaller than Stark Vegas small. That's small, but it's nice. They have great facilities for a group of 5 program, but it's not what Tulane has, and not what Tulane has potentially. And I think, ironically, or coincidentally, I always get those two confused. They're both building new facilities. I think I saw Tulane's building an indoor bubble facility, and Tulane is going to build an indoor facility sort of along the lines of what the Cajuns have and what South Alabama has, mostly to get out of the sun in August
And
to get training camp. That's basically what the indoor facility is these days.
Yeah, I mean, and the inclement weather here over in New Orleans, where there's just randomly a deluge and lightning.
Sure.
I remember there was a lightning delay in training camp, and we all kind of sat in the tunnel for 45 minutes. I'm like, well, this goes to show you kind of why you need that indoor facility. I do think just I tend to agree with you, where I think if Jon Sumrall had remained at Troy, depending on who Tulane hired at head coach, Troy very well might have been the favorite for that G5 playoff spot. I just feel like the G5 discussion, it's not going to be great going into this expansion of the college football playoffs. If you thought the one New Year's Six Bowl had poor discourse, I don't feel like things are going to immediately really turn into people exactly following along with every G5 program. So for that reason, I do feel like perception of your program before the season probably matters more than anything else. And that's why I keep saying, as much as people keep overlooking the Military Bowl for Tulane, having a Power 5 win to end this year and probably go into next year potentially ranked. I mean, it's probably going to be looking at Liberty and Tulane now, because you'd either be looking at SMU in that equation, but with them going off to the ACC, I almost feel like the selection committee honestly just expected Tulane to win that conference championship game. And when they didn't, they just kind of decided, let's just leave all the injured quarterbacks out of every single equation with FSU and that SMU spot. Not to say that Liberty didn't make a case for it, but especially with SMU not being in the picture next year, to me, it really comes down to Liberty, Tulane, and then if another team happens to come out and shock earlier in the year.
Yeah, so like you said, it's really important to get into those rankings. And for everybody who does the rankings, I'm sure some take it very seriously and put some effort into it. But there are others that just don't have the time to they have to watch their own team and their own teams. They can't be watching everybody. But as soon as you get into the rankings, as soon as you're 25th and teams above you lose, you move up, right? You just go down at loss. JMU, they won, move up. And so it is important to get in there as quickly as possible, because that's how the rankings work. And if you're dominating, in the American or in the Sunbelt, and everybody else in the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, or the ACC are playing each other, well, they lose, you can move up. And so that's how the rankings work. And, it is important, like you said, to end the year with good perception that Sunbelt is having a really difficult time with that. They're 1-4 in bowl games. And the two best teams lost their coaches, Troy and JMU. So we'll see how those two teams go, I guess, on this Saturday.
Yeah, it's interesting to me just how the bowl discourse outside of the New Year's Six for G5 teams really gets thrown out the window for a lot of people. But I mean, you then think about when teams don't go to bowl games, like how demoralizing that is for a program. I mean, when 2-10 is bad, but for teams that go 5-7, that also stings of just not really being there enough. And then your season just kind of abruptly ending. But I especially like you said, when it starts to accumulate within a conference, then that becomes something where you really have to focus on winning your bowl game. Because again, at preseason rankings, I think it's going to be easy to kind of sneak in for Tulane, especially playing Oklahoma and Kansas State earlier on in the year. And I don't know if we'll start to see now. It'll be interesting to me if strength of schedule matters more in this college football playoff expansion kind of thing of, if we see another undefeated team, but they haven't played teams that would even be in the rankings discussion. I mean, how would you kind of look at that for those kind of teams next year?
Well, that's what it is, right? Did Liberty show the Sunbelt on how to go about doing this, right? Let's not do the Power 5 payday. Liberty is its own financial deal, so they're pretty well off, and they have amazing facilities. But maybe don't go take the $1 million and a loss. Let's go get some wins, and maybe that's the way to do it, because that's what Liberty showed us. Now, Liberty played New Mexico State, ends up pretty good, right? They beat them twice; they're pretty good. But the Cajuns have Michigan State coming up. That program is a mess, but they got a new coach. We'll see what Jonathan Smith does. Although the Cajuns quarterback just went in the transfer portal, but maybe that loss isn't worth it anymore, right? That maybe you have to figure out new ways to fund your program. Whereas an undefeated season, you're going to be in good shape, right? It was interesting, that, Liberty won all their ball games, got to the New York 6-day bowl. Florida State won all their bowl games, but they got bumped. Yeah. So that will be interesting on how we move forward with that. And, again, it doesn't matter if there's 2, the 3rd and 4th teams are going to complain. When there's 4, the 5th and 6th teams are going to complain. We'll get to 12 and the 13th and 14th teams are going to complain. We've gone from 64 to 68. So the 69th team complains in basketball. It happens every year.
It's just interesting to me because, I mean, you think back to Tulane, if they beat Ole Miss, I think this whole year goes completely different for Tulane is really just in a different conversation the entire season long. And they were kind of close to doing it without their starting quarterback. So I think, Tulane has played Oklahoma and Kansas State. Granted, they've been in different years with different teams and different head coaches at this point, but it's going to be curious to me going into the actual college football playoffs where it's not just the New Year's Six Bowl, where what kind of product are we really concerned about putting out there? Is it just the undefeated thing, or do we have to see a credible resume be built? So I am glad for that reason that Tulane does have Jon Sumrall, because they're going to have that challenge of the non-conference schedule to start the year. They also play the Raging Cajuns at that. And right. Going undefeated through that would be huge for them. And so kind of just curious to your thoughts on what it takes to sustain success at this G5 level. If it's not continuing to kind of challenge and schedule those non-conference games, what have you kind of seen as those elements throughout G5 programs?
Well, I think it's changed. I think when the early signing day period started, I really liked it, because now these G5 coaches in December can amass their class. Now, does it still happen that, we're just using these as example, right? LSU takes Arkansas's tight end, so Arkansas takes the Cajuns tight end. All right. That happens in February. It probably still happens in December. But now the coaches who weren't sleeping from the end of their regular season until February trying to put their class together, now that time is shortened. They also got to deal with the portal, so that's a whole different thing. But now they have their class amassed. They have whatever it is, 15, 20 guys going forward, and now we can fill it in and deal with the Power 5 team stealing our guys later on. So I like that. But now, boy, this calendar is out of whack, right? You have a Sunbelt championship. Well, the conference championships are the beginning of December. The portal opens up basically the Monday after that. You have bowl games, you have signing day. And that's why maybe some of these college coaches are like, you know what? I'm going into TV. This is just too much for me. And then for the kids, right? The A&M, or not the A&M, the Texas quarterback left because I wanted to be in the playoff, but I got to be on campus of whatever new school I'm going to. And the playoff is in January, and that's not going to work for me. So someone has to figure out these college schedules, and when the kids have to be on campus, and make it make it not only easier for the coaches, but a little bit easier for the players, because it all seems to be happening at one time. And like I said at the beginning, Maddy, I'm just not sure you can build a program sustainable and hope that your quarterback remains the same. So I'll give you an example. We'll see what happens moving forward. All right. Arkansas State basically had the freshman of the year, Jalen Rayner. All right. Butch Jones was on the way out. The first 2 ball games was 110-3. All right. And he was on the way out. So Arkansas changes quarterbacks, put a true freshman in. They're going to a bowl game. He's got it turned around. Well, now they recruited Josh Flowers, somebody who's got SEC talent and SEC offers, and he's going to play for Arkansas State. All right. But now he's going to be a year behind Jalen Rayner. And so does Jalen Rayner end up getting that, Power 5 offer if he has another good year? Does Josh Flowers stick around? What happens if Jalen Rayner says, I'm staying here at Arkansas State for 3 or 4 years, and Josh Flowers can leave? So I'm not sure how you build a program. I think now in Power 5 and Group of 5, I think it's a different team every year. It's more like your JV basketball team, whereas you know who the freshmen are, and maybe your sophomores are that's what I think it is. I think it's more like your JV basketball team, where it changes on a regular basis compared to your varsity, who may stick around. But it's going to be tough for the G5 teams. It's kind of tough for the Power 5 teams to build a program that has any sort of semblance over a 2 or 3 year period.
Yeah, it's been pretty incredible to me that I largely recognize a lot of guys on this team from my first season as a sideline reporter, which is incredible in the age of the transfer portal and what I've seen at Tulane where you pretty much have both situations where, or all 3 years have been prime for mass exodus. I mean, 2-10, I am still shocked that only one starter transferred after that year. Then after last year, guys were yielding Power 5 offers, but a lot of them decided to stick around. And then, losing Willie Fritz, yes, we did see some starters enter the transfer portal, but it's been astonishing to me that we've seen twice as many guys commit to coming back next season. So it's a curious thing, because I agree with you. And I think your point at quarterback, especially, if you're not consistently really in the portal, or thinking about what guys you might target if your guy leaves, then you're definitely behind the 8 ball here, because again, we got really lucky with Michael Pratt that he wanted to stay at Tulane, but there are these guys that do well at G5 schools get these NIL offers. And I was saying this in regards to, talking about coaches taking a job double their pay. We were talking about literally any other industry. There wouldn't even be a discourse in terms of should they do this, unless it's,
Right.
a horrible working environment kind of thing. But the idea of loyalty in an age where money talks is just really weird to me. And so it's been incredible to see how Tulane's kind of been able to combat that. I think something that also sets them apart as a G5 is having, for lack of a better term, a rich alumni base and a really good NIL
Right.
collective that has, amassed several $1 million at this point. That to me is kind of the only Hail Mary you can really have in the G5 world at this point, is you have to be able to pay your guys and understand that, like you said, if you're not just accepting that this is literally chaos and it just continues to get more unhinged with the, transfer waiver getting waived. I mean, you just have to kind of prepare to be consistently looking to get new guys on your squad. So I think it's a good point where before, when we were talking about Jon Sumrall, adaptability might be the biggest head coach trait for a G5 coach right now.
Well, you'd be able to talk to this more than I would, but it feels like Tulane has decided to, go towards athletics, right? So for those who don't know, and maybe they do because they watch you, Tulane is a really good academic institution. You said rich alumni. That's because it costs a pretty penny to go to Tulane. So, for those who don't know, who watch your program, I can say I love talking out of both sides of my mouth. So I can tell you that Nick Saban making $12 million a year as a college football coach is overpaid. At the same time, Alabama's enrollment has increased more than 50% since he's been there, and as a state school now has more kids from out of state than in state. I know the state thing doesn't affect Tulane per se, but Nick Saban has amassed a huge amount of money in coming to the University of Alabama. And once Tulane says, all right, now we go get a college basketball coach that's been to the NCAA tournament. And if you haven't gone to see Ron Hunter, you need to go to see Ron Hunter, because he's a show in himself. All right. Don't watch a basketball game, just watch Ron Hunter. All right. Because he's fun. But if you open up the doors to, making your football program competitive on a regular basis and being on TV on a regular basis, you're going to get people from all over the world or all over the United States that want to come to Tulane. And that's the way that works. What the SEC did with CBS and all of those schools, unbelievable. I don't think back in the 80s, Florida was a very tough school to get into. But Steve Spurrier shows up, and all of a sudden now only 30% of the people applying get into Florida. Like, Florida is a really good school. I had a couple of cousins, incredibly smart. He ended up being the president of the student body at Florida State. Couldn't get into Florida. Really bright kid. All right. His sister, just as smart. So this stuff helps with the academics as well. And it feels like Tulane is finally saying, you know what? Let's get into the academics. It's really the front porch of the institution. It's a 3.5-hour commercial from, Labor Day through Thanksgiving every Saturday. And it's not only the athletic program that's going to improve, but it will be the college and the university that improves when we improve the athletic department. It's all one big circle. I think
100%. And I think you're really dead on. And that was really my takeaway from the press conference, was the amount of times that they really married those two concepts together. Because honestly, I went to Tulane in spite of knowing that I wasn't going to get a college football experience whatsoever. And that was something that I weighed and just kind of accepted as not going to happen. But it's something that, tailgating, going to games, that it really is a part, especially for people that grow up in college football families. They're not going to go to a school that has absolutely no college football culture. And that's really difficult. And so to see just the community and engagement, the fact that we had fans buying tickets to donate to students to get into the championship game. And they were lined up in a torrential downpour 3 hours before the game started. But you've seen Tulane. I mean, now their enrollment is way higher than what, like, their undergraduate population since when I went there. I don't remember what mine was, but it seems half of what they have now. And it seems twice as more difficult to get into the school. So I think you're absolutely dead on that. I've had my family in California regularly asking me about Tulane now because they've seen it on TV every game, almost every game this year outside of the FAU game. It was pretty astonishing to see what Tulane was able to kind of do as a national brand. And that's also something, again, where you talk about the perception for these college football playoffs, having everyone know who you are the year after you defeated the Heisman Trophy winner. Tulane has a lot of things going for them. They just kind of have to ride with this momentum. And I just, to see Jon Sumrall also really just get out there, boots on the ground, and be at these high schools recruiting like the day after he had that press conference. To me, he's done, quite a bit in just a short period of time, where you've seen a lot of guys flip over to come to Tulane. And that I would be very curious to hear those conversations of, kind of a really new head coach to a program. But I think he can really clearly illustrate his vision to these players, and that seems to be resonating.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear, because I didn't know this until, he got the job. It'll be interesting to hear what Jon Sumrall thinks, what the program was when he was there before, and what the program is now, because I got to believe it's a little bit night and day.
Yeah, he did make reference to when Yeoman was first built, running out to the other sideline and realizing that those are kind of the little things that make you realize the school isn't that behind on the football program, because they're not really paying attention to those small details. Whereas now it's moved to our home sideline where the fans are. It really is those kind of small details. But you think about how obsessive football coaches are about every small detail in the game like that. As much as fans kind of talk about that, I could see that genuinely driving a coach nuts, but just, again, kind of being like, just not understanding the concept of football. And so he said that that's something that was a marked change from when he left the first time. He said he was leaving when President Mike Fitz came in. I think he's really been just the difference maker here. And then I really have to credit David Harris for never hiring a coach before. I don't, again, for Tulane fans, I think Tulane's going to Tulane at all times. For everyone to immediately say it should be Jon Sumrall, it's the top choice for the job. Tulane moved in like 3 days' time and got their guy. To me, that's as good as they can do. And as you said, to get with the academics as well. And that's Tulane's best path to sustaining success at this level. I don't know if it's everyone's, but I think that they can really use all of those things in their advantage, and might not win the college football playoffs, but you're definitely looking at a lane to it this next year.
Well, think about going into now mom and dad's, living room, right? Not only can we say we're sending guys on back-to-back years to the Senior Bowl football wise, but check out Tulane academics, right? If something doesn't happen and they're not going to the NFL, and let's be honest, most kids are not. We hope your kid does, right? You're going to get a great, a spectacular education. All right. For those who don't think that, the scholarship in place in trade for playing is equitable, I'm pretty sure going to like Tulane is about $300,000 to $400,000 over a 4-year period, and that doesn't include enjoying Mardi Gras. So, it's well worth it. And he has an extra talking point now when he sits in living rooms to mom and dad. Right, we got a good football program, but we'll take care of him on the academic side as well.
No, 100%. I mean, people talk about that being really the driving point for Tulane, and obviously some guys just don't care about that. But I think it's 0.01% of players in college football make it to the NFL. So
right. Mom and dad care about that.
Right. But, it has definitely gotten tough in this age again of NIL, where, you could arguably say that that's kind of paying for your education, but it's that kind of long-term view. But to me, also your point about back-to-back Senior Bowl, it's not only that, to have a quarterback go and to have the two guys that went last year both be third-round draft picks who are now playing credibly in the NFL. I mean, that's 2 out of 1 year for a G5 team like Tulane that no one was paying attention to for the last 10 or 12 years or so. Tulane has a lot going for them, and everything says that they have the right guy at the helm now with Jon Sumrall. And I just think him being, on the younger side and having that juice, if you will, it really helps to kind of push through. And what I think is going to be, it's going to be a difficult mountain top to climb for any team this year, but making a run to the playoffs, all of the expectations, all of the attention to every single week this year is just going to be a different level of scrutiny than I think we're used to seeing. But his confidence through everything has just seemed to shine through.
Well, in the Sunbelt, the thing that I like about the Sunbelt is that we have access right now. Lafayette happens to have a little bit more media than these other places. In Mobile, when I'm covering South Alabama, there was 3 people covering on a regular basis, right? Mostly 2, right? Me and Craig Stevenson, the beat writer. Once in a while, Tommy Hicks would come out, and once in a while, one of the TV stations would come out. In Troy, there's the beat writer, and maybe the TV stations come out. So everybody knows everybody, right? You're not sitting in a room of 50 people like an SEC, or even maybe like, Tulane, where all of the TV stations are coming in and there are maybe a couple of dozen people there. And so when Jon Sumrall gets to know you and he talks about Josh Boutwell and his cancer fight and telling how impressed he is that this guy's out here every day and he's out here in the heat. And we want to make sure that he knows he's part of the family. And then one of the Troy players decides, you know what, that NIL deal you're giving me, we're going to raise money for Josh to help pay for his cancer treatment. And they raised over $11,000 for that. That's a tip that Jon Sumrall is. It's not just, winning. All right. That's important, but also being a human being and noticing when other people are putting in the work and maybe when other people need to be lifted up. And that's the kind of guy that Jon Sumrall is. I absolutely am disappointed he left Troy. I certainly understand why. And I think Tulane could not have done any better than Jon Sumrall.
After that incredible story, I truly could not agree more. So awesome. Thank you. It's easy to hear a promo in the middle of the podcast and think, well, of course they like the product. They're paid to. Well, if you know me at all, then you know 2 things. 1, I'm truthful, almost to a fault. And 2, if I were in it for the money, well, then I'd be doing something else. So believe me when I say that I love Blue Oak Barbecue. The food, the drinks, the people, the location. Yes, all of that. Blue Oak Barbecue has a great selection of your favorites from the smoker, fantastic sides, and awesome bar specials each week. Check them out. Blue Oak Barbecue, 900 North Carrollton Avenue in New Orleans. Visit them online at blueoakbbq.com. All right, y'all. Again, that was Dave Schultz of Locked On Sunbelt podcast. Really appreciate his time and just all of his insight into the type of person that Jon Sumrall is. I think I really took that away more than anything else, especially that ending story of what his players did with NIL to help a teammate out with cancer. I mean, that really is just incredible. And it really goes beyond any type of football conversation. And it just speaks to, again, the person and the leader that Jon Sumrall is. And the best leaders, you see that translate and transfuse through the people underneath you and your players. And I just think that these Tulane players and this fan base already have responded very well to Jon Sumrall and are going to really continue to do so. And I enjoyed how our discussion really got into kind of the weeds of what, I hadn't really thought about probably as much as I should have going into this next season with the expansion of the college football playoffs, where I think it really just forces you to really look at it a lot closer now when you realize that it's this next season and that Tulane, after having a successful longtime head coach in Willie Fritz, bring the program to heights where they're very credibly in the conversation of being that team slated in the college football playoffs next year. So to have someone new come in, I think it really puts just that kind of more eyes on the program. But all of the eye tests so far have really just been strong and been such a takeaway here. And I enjoyed too, and I'll be curious to see how this really plays out next year, because I think when you're talking about New Year's Six bowl games, it's different than the college football playoffs, where will we see an emphasis more on strength of schedule take place for that group of 5 team this year, because that's the way that Tulane's doing this. With, again, their non-conference slate, including Oklahoma and Kansas State, those are potential losses for a team, but the win potential and the potential that comes with that is just so great. And it's something that I think Tulane as a team is capable of. In our conversation, he was talking about a lot of these schools taking it for the paycheck, knowing that they're going to lose the game. I don't know if Tulane looks at these teams like that anymore, or these teams look at Tulane like that. 2 or 3 years ago, absolutely. I think when you saw them play Ole Miss in the 2-10 year, the perception of Tulane, especially to Power 5 programs, was just incredibly different than what it is. And you just think about all the Ole Miss fans this year and their takeaway of how impressive Tulane was in the trenches. I know that their last outing was probably one of their poorest on the offensive line, all things considered, but I just keep going back to all the injuries across the line this year and at quarterback and how that really all just accumulates. But we've seen this team go toe to toe with Power 5 teams in the trenches multiple times now. We saw them beat Kansas State 2 seasons ago, eventually the Heisman Trophy winner. And yes, they weren't able to beat a Power 5 team in the regular season this year, but they held them and held their own until the final 3 minutes of that football game with their backup quarterback. So Tulane, again, this Military Bowl is nothing to sneeze at for them. It's definitely disappointing when you were all but considered that New Year's Six team. All you had to do was win out that final game. But if you don't think that that's burning inside these Tulane football guys, I got something for you. But it's not just finishing out this year with a win. It's, for these guys, especially the guys that have committed to coming back next year, knowing how much that perception matters going into next season and the potential to get ranked early on and what that can really do for Tulane, and seeing how that really pays off in this recruiting class, in the transfer portal, and just seeing Jon Sumrall move in his first year. It's definitely a tall task. It's not just coming into a program and going to a New Year's Six. Now it's the college football playoffs, and you have to have that conversation with the guys on your team, with coaches, and that vision for the program. And if nothing else, it's very clear that Tulane is in good hands, and we know how much of a group of fighters that these guys are. I expect to see that next week in the Military Bowl, but especially this offseason, it's probably the most excited that I've been to cover one of all time, but this season ain't done yet. And so I will see y'all with my next show from somewhere out in DC.